We have had more technical difficulties than Newark Airport this morning.
I need an extra cup of coffee for sure.
Smart girl, dumb questions. Welcome to Smart Girl, Dumb Questions. I'm Nayeema Raza, and today my dumb questions are about what's happening up there in the air when it comes to safety. It's a topic that came up briefly in my recent episode with the Points guys, and I promised you a more thorough episode about all things airline safety before we kick into the summer. Because this has been a kind of frightening year for travel. In January of 2025, we saw the first deadly commercial airline crash in the United States since 2009. 67 people died. And we had been hearing about close calls and short staffing issues well before that. And then in recent weeks, we have seen these air traffic control outages, like communication blackouts in major airports in Newark, Denver, Atlanta. And all of this makes me wonder, is it getting more dangerous to fly, or are we just paying more attention to it? My guest today is Kate Kelly. She's an investigative journalist who's worked at the Wall Street Journal, the New York Observer, and for the last 8 or so years at the New York Times. And she has been deep in the story of airline safety. She has talked to regulators, air traffic controllers, and spent time inside of airline and helicopter cockpits, which I have to say is pretty damn cool. I needed her to help me understand, do the pilots' screens look just like they do in the movies? Is air traffic control radio as bad as in-flight Wi-Fi? I'm kidding. That's not possible. Is it actually safe to fly? And with politicians pointing their fingers left and right, I wonder, who is actually to blame for all of this? And who is going to fix it? Here's my conversation with Kate Kelly. Welcome, Kate Kelly. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I guess my first question for you is just, are we all going to die on an airplane? The Points guy told me that it's not going to happen in a recent episode, but I need to confirm.
I think no. I hope not. We do have to have some trust in the system that the FAA in this case is going to slow down or even stop flights in and out of, say, Newark, or it could be another airport, if they really just simply don't have the staffing. The slightly scarier thing is that the equipment, can flip out without notice. They do have backup plans. I mean, these controllers are pros and they know how to sort of go to plan B and plan C. So I think the short answer is we're probably okay. But I think to the extent people are nervous, it is rational. It's not just paranoia.
You have personally bylined no fewer than, I think, 20 articles this year alone. You and your colleagues have had hundreds over the past couple years. Has your reporting changed how you fly?
Yeah, it has. I'll be honest. I mean, first of all, just to set the table, I'm not a nervous flyer. I actually really enjoy it. I think it's one of the few times where I can completely disconnect and just read a book. I get a lot done on flights. But yeah, I'll say it has. For starters, the nature of my job, I travel back and forth from New York to DC a lot. Like sometimes every week, sometimes every 2 weeks. But since DCA...
And DCA?
DCA is Reagan National Airport in Washington, thank you, which is where they had that horrific crash on January 29th. So I am not doing Reagan National at night. And I am not doing Newark at all. Now, it must be said, I never was a big fan of Newark. It was never that convenient to where my family is in the New York City area, so I never used it much. But I'm not that comfortable now. Now, do I think that the correct steps will be taken if staffing is low? I do. However, it's these equipment outages that make me nervous. And even after Transportation Secretary Duffy put in what was meant to be sort of an immediate fix, this was a couple of weeks ago, they had a brief outage after that. It wasn't as bad as some of the others. So I think we're on the right trajectory, but that is a scary thought.
A less bad outage. Sounds like great news, Kate. What great news did you bring us today? Okay.
Yeah.
Just to get like a lay of the land, or I guess a lay of the air in this case, the timeline here is wacky. In the summer of 2022, we have COVID delays, shortages, outages, et cetera. Then in 2023, there's a big New York Times story by your colleagues Emily Steele, Sydney Ember, and some others saying airline close calls happen more often than we think. And they talk about, one or more near misses a day. Then in early 2024, Boeing door plugs start flying off airlines. We saw that Air Alaska flight. And then in 2025, we have the crash between a helicopter and an American Airlines flight at Ronald Reagan Airport. And now we have these outages in Newark Airport, and I believe we've seen outages in other airports Denver, maybe Atlanta, elsewhere.
Yes.
So these 5 things, these 5 disparate things that have happened about airlines, are they connected in some way, or are these just 5 different things happening?
Yes.
Or is anything not like the other? Yes.
So the Boeing issue is separate from the other things that we're talking about. So let's sort of put that off to the side. But the other things, I think they're all connected. Some of them might be coincidental. So to me, the big picture is staffing and equipment. Um, the staffing issue has been a chronic one over the years. We frequently hear from New York Times readers who want us to go back to Ronald Reagan's bust up of PATCO, which was the former Air Traffic Controllers Union in 1981. And when he broke that union, he also said that the air traffic controllers in that system at the time could not be rehired. So you had a sort of a start from scratch situation.
So in 1981, air traffic control workers went on strike. Ronald Reagan got pissed. He said, you can leave now. And they had to bring in a new crop of people. So the theory is that like everybody had to retire at the same time, or we're having some kind of crank in the system because of this 1980s union issue.
Right. Now, in some ways, I think that's a tough argument. I mean, some of those restrictions were lifted in the early 90s. And you would think certainly by 2020, you have this new generation. You probably have a second generation up and going because there's a mandatory retirement age of 56 in the FAA system. So that's a while ago, but it does come up a lot in these conversations. So then you have the pandemic, and obviously there's a virtual grind to a stop of airline travel. There was a moratorium on training for air traffic controllers. Then when it resumed, it was sort of at 50% because they were trying to space people a certain distance apart. So there were all these COVID restrictions that made it tough to train people up in what really needs to be an IRL environment, right? You're sitting with someone, you're looking at the radar, you can't do it from home. And that process can take literally years. To do air traffic control at a Newark or a Southern California, that's maybe years and years. So that led to staffing shortages at just the time that we were recovering from the pandemic and air travel was exploding. Like, remember that feeling when you were finally comfortable leaving your home and you wanted to go out and do something? You wanted to see the world. You wanted to take a vacation.
You want to go to fucking Paris. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, people were traveling a ton and air travel has gone up like exponentially since pre-pandemic. So you've got a delay in new hiring. You've got sort of people aging out of the system. And what you have is a shortfall of air traffic controllers to the tune of thousands. And that has just been the state of play in recent years. So Emily and Sydney did a piece on this in 2023. They did another piece very recently, like 10 days ago, showing that 99% of air traffic control hubs in the United States are understaffed.
Wow. Okay.
I think the staffing is one piece of the other things we're talking about, and the equipment is the other piece. And as I said, I think the equipment, it's both a long story and a short story. The long story is, and Sean Duffy would happily tell you about this,
this is the transportation secretary.
Trump's new transportation secretary, who's been very public about his concerns. To his credit, we have a very old system. Some of the equipment that air traffic controllers and others in the system use to like take flight data from an airport and sort of route it to an air traffic control hub that could be 80 miles away is very, very old, like 1980s, 1990s. And I don't know why. And here's where I do wonder, and I don't have a satisfactory answer to this, why we're at a tipping point. Are we at a tipping point right now? Or has this actually been gradually going on for a number of years and the reporting just hasn't been there because the public interest wasn't there?
Yeah, that's the big question. The one question is, if it's so unsafe, why is it still safe, I think, for everybody who's traveling? And then there is a big question is, are airplanes and airports breaking down more, or are we just paying more attention because of TikTok and the excellent reporting? And because we know as journalists that as you start covering a story, your sources start getting cultivated, you start developing more leads. As it becomes more visible, more people are willing to speak to you on background or even go on the record. So do you have a sense of how much kind of observing the thing is changing the thing?
My educated guess is that more of this is happening because I've been somewhat involved with our coverage since 2023. But the first I heard of an equipment outage from any of my sources was last Labor Day. It was August 27th of 2024 at Newark. And there was another thing that happened a few days later, and another thing that happened equipment-wise in November of that year. But all of a sudden, starting April 28th of this year, there was a spate of equipment outages.
Is this only happening in the United States that we know of?
I can't speak to that precisely, but I think it seems to be worse here than in other countries. I mean, we are now being unfavorably compared to a lot of different places.
Like, for example?
Oh, Europe, Australia.
Okay.
You just don't hear about this level of problem in other locales.
And do you have a theory of the case for why that we're reporting, ideally, of why that is happening? Is that related to kind of the lack of regulation or the decentralization of airport authorities in the United States or the privatization of the commercial airline industry? Like, what is it about America that has had the pandemic had this long-term shortage issue?
So if we posit that there is some sort of a tipping point right now, like let's assume there were outages and staffing issues prior to 2023 that we all just weren't as aware of and weren't reporting as aggressively on. Let's assume that, but let's also assume that there's more happening right now than in the more distant past. I think you've got a variety of issues. I mean, it's not like just because we have equipment that's from the 1980s, it should all fail on a Tuesday in April, right? Obviously, like things fail gradually. One thing is problematic over here, then downline, you've got a problem over there. Like that's sort of how you would think it would evolve. I think the staffing shortages have been bad and are not getting any better. But more broadly, I think there's a whole variety of things that happen in the United States that make this a tricky place. I would say that air traffic control modernization efforts have been sort of languishing and underfunded for many years.
And they would be funded by whom? The government?
Underfunded by the government. It's an FAA project, right? But it needs congressional appropriations. It needs sort of White House political buy-in. It probably needs more public interest and public urgency to motivate those electeds to unleash the budget money.
Right.
It's the procurement process, which I'm not an expert on, but just to give you one example.
Which is not sexy, but yes.
Not
sexy. Give us the example.
But it takes a long time. And this is something you'll hear the current White House and the current Republican Party talk about, like the need for deregulation, the red tape associated with doing projects. There's a reality to that. I mean, Pete Buttigieg, we reached out to him for a fact check about who's responsible for these modernization attempts and failures, or who's to blame for getting to this moment.
Yeah, who cheaped out on the budget to modernize this stuff since the 1990s? Like, who hasn't forked up? It seems like it's everybody. It's Democrats and Republicans. Everyone who's been in power.
It's a multi-administration, multi-year problem. But when we asked the Buttigieg camp for comment on, what did they do to try to aid, in this, one answer we got was that they signed a new contract with Verizon for $2.3 billion to replace some of the infrastructure in the FAA with fiber, right? So replace those copper wires you hear about with fiber. That was in 2023. And to my knowledge, it's still ramping up. And it's 2025 and we're in like a crisis mode. Now,
maybe we need DOGE to go to Verizon. Just kidding.
Well, as we know, Elon Musk has already urged the FAA to embrace Starlink, which is their satellite comms effort in aviation. And there is some experimentation going on with that in Alaska and other places. But yeah, I say this not to blame Buttigieg, but simply to say it seems to take years to bring in a new vendor to solve a problem that's been going on for decades. And that's kind of too long.
Totally. The airline issue has become a political football. You have Secretary Duffy and President Trump blaming the Democrats, blaming Biden for this. You have former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg saying this is about kind of cost cutting more recently. So you're hearing it from all sides, but this seems like everyone's kind of in on it. Everyone's been complicit over multiple decades. And it's not just about Reagan in the 80s. It's every single administration since then that has failed to prioritize this issue. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. And I think this is a little bit of a tortured argument because airline revenue does not go directly to the FAA. But I also think as Americans, we want a great deal, don't you? I mean, I want a really great fare for my vacation, but we expect to be able to pay, I don't know, 50, 100, 200 bucks to go somewhere. It really, though, doesn't support like a hot meal on the plane that's palatable, more space in your seat, work a clean, modern aircraft, a happy staff. And I think to some extent that all redounds to like our level of willingness to contribute, but also height of expectations on safety and regulation as well.
That is the wild thing. There's great maps of this, like showing you how many seats pay for labor, how many seats pay for, the cost of the infrastructure, the cost of the maintenance. And it's almost like if you're not operating fully sold out flights, you're often losing money on certain routes.
Right. And I think there's also a tail wags the dog theory of it, which is the flying experience is often not very good, right? Delays, change in gates, change in flights, whatever.
No, I feel like they should pay me to fly half the time.
Right. And there is no food. There's no food that you can even buy half the time. There's no TVs half the time. The Wi-Fi is terrible. Like all these things, the airports are overcrowded. To get a bottle of water is like $5. So you think to yourself, well, I shouldn't be paying much for this because this is truly terrible. But those systemic issues are really more on the FAA side, probably.
Yeah, but you're saying something interesting, which is not only has the government been cheapening out, consumers have also been kind of cheap and tight in their wallets.
Right.
I want to zoom back out. So, talk about this American Airlines crash, because one of the things I feel like we do a bad job as a society of paying attention to stories down the line. And we're kind of all, paying attention, rubbernecking when it's the big story of the day. And then we're like, oh yeah, what actually caused that crash? And I was thinking whether it's this or the California fires or the Miami Surfside Tower crash, like all these horrific things we stay glued to, we sometimes don't remember to follow up. You just did a follow-up story on that crash. What actually caused the helicopter and the American Airlines flight to crash into one another?
Thank you for asking. First of all, very, very tragically, 67 people died. The crew on that Black Hawk all died. The 64 people who were on that American Airlines flight, which was 4 crew and 60 passengers, all died. The short answer is multiple factors. And that's part of the challenge of investigative reporting. And we all want sort of a clean narrative. This one is not very clean. But there's an analogy you hear about a lot in air safety, which is the Swiss cheese model. Have you heard of this?
No.
So if you think of a block of Swiss cheese, right, there are holes in it, but they're in different places in the block, right? They don't all line up. So the theory of the case here is that, aviation safety is like a block of Swiss cheese. Like if you have a hole over here, like an equipment outage, it's not going to go right through the cheese into like some sort of disaster. You might have another hole over here, which is like a pilot error, and a hole that's like a visibility issue, but they're supposed to be in different spots and there's supposed to be redundancies to keep the system safe.
Yes.
So in
this
this
does
case,
not
the
sound
Swiss cheese
appetizing.
model,
Yeah.
it's not appetizing at all.
Yeah.
But hopefully you don't end up with a foodborne illness. Okay, this analogy has run its course. In this case, I think you did have multiple problems and the redundancies just failed, or there were so many problems that the structure of safety could not be supported. So you essentially had an Army helicopter that crashed into a commercial flight. It was in the wrong place. It was at the wrong altitude. It was flying at round numbers. It was flying at about 275 feet, from sea level when it crashed into the airplane, which roughly speaking was at about 313 feet above sea level a second before impact. So clearly they should have been at different altitudes. And the right of way in the air was that the helicopter should have been lower. We don't know why that happened. Was there an equipment failure? Did the pilot have a health event at the controls? There are just some unknowns there. But for whatever reason, it didn't work. You had the air traffic controller who did do his job. He did do his job. And some people we interviewed, actually military aviators who had experience like that Army pilot would have in that cockpit, said that actually that person went above and beyond by like warning them several times that there was air traffic near them and they needed to look out for it. And they said they saw it, right? Their response was, we have the traffic. But the air traffic controller, his phraseology wasn't exactly what it should be. Like, to give you an example, when you say there's air traffic that you need to, ascertain and avoid, you want to give more positional information, like it's at your blank o'clock. look out the window at this particular location, not just quote unquote, do you see traffic? So the controller could have done more. We think that the controller may have been taxed because he was performing 2 air traffic control jobs at the same time. And while that is not uncommon, it's usually not done at that hour of the night in that location. It usually happens later when the traffic has started to taper off. And there are other issues. I won't go down the whole laundry list, but potential equipment failures that we know about, and a backdrop of overly congested airspace, overly stressed air traffic controllers, and especially these frequent military helicopter flights up and down the Potomac, like this one, that had sort of gotten out of hand. And then finally, I should say, there was a very poorly designed set of air routes that had the landing American Airlines flight on a glide slope that put it 75 feet or less from a helicopter that might have been traveling down that route at the same time, if it was in its proper place. And in this case, the helicopter wasn't.
And wasn't there also something like the Pentagon phone lines to Ronald Reagan Airport were not working?
So that's a separate issue, which I'm happy to talk about, but that was not an issue here.
Okay.
That happened on a separate occasion. There's a phone line, like a sort of a hotline between the Pentagon and the Ronald Reagan Airport Tower that has not been functional for 3 years. And we found this out very recently because there was a different Army helicopter that flew sort of too close for comfort into the DCA airspace. No injuries, thank God. Everybody was okay. But one of the factors that came out after the fact was that this hotline was broken. They do have other ways to get in touch, which is to say a landline.
Oh, good. Was a switchboard operator working that day?
I'm not sure.
It's all very 1980s as a tribute to Ronald Reagan. Did heads roll? Will heads roll?
Ish. Definitely the controller who was speaking to both flights has been interviewed by safety investigators. I'm almost certain his supervisors have, and other people that were in the tower. Some of those people have been on trauma leave. I believe the controller himself has been on leave. Within the FAA, we've had a retirement. The person who ran air traffic operations, Tim Morrell, retired.
And was this like a kind of retired, let me give you my forced resignation letter, or was it a retirement?
I can't answer that. I did look into it. I had the same question and I got sort of different answers, but I think officially it was a retirement, and it seems he had told people he was looking to retire even before this happened. So hard to say on the exact timing. What else? We're already in a situation where we're brand new in an administration. So we have an acting administrator at the FAA. We have a confirmed Secretary of Transportation.
So there are a lot of government agencies that you're talking about right now. There's the Pentagon, obviously, that has to deal with the military helicopters. That's its own separate thing. That's military aircraft. And then in civilian aircraft and commercial air travel, there's the FAA, which is the Federal Aviation Authority. And that is under the Department of Transportation? Or is that a separate? Okay. There's also something called the NTSB.
The National Transportation Safety Board. And I believe that's an independent entity, not part of the DOT. And their job is to investigate any and all transportation accidents.
So any transportation safety issue across America, whether it's Amtrak or this, et cetera.
It's an independent safety review board, and they'll do a sort of investigative reporting type of thing with multiple agencies. And hopefully get the cooperation of all those parties. And at the end, they'll put out a report. It often can take 2 years for a major disaster. In this case, they've committed to 1 year for the January 29th crash. And they'll make recommendations as to what the FAA in this case or other entities should do to improve safety. Those recommendations are not always taken.
Okay, so it's a non-binding independent institution that is funded with taxpayer dollars. Is that correct? Okay, got it. Seems a bit odd. And this was the first major deadly airline crash since 2009 in the United States. People always say that, like, first major deadly It's like, I don't even want to be in a minor deadly airline crash.
Yeah, the prior one was in the Buffalo, New York area, and I believe there were 50 casualties. So not as many casualties, but that's sort of the closest comparable.
Right. And 2009 was also the year that Captain Sully kind of heroically landed that flight into the Hudson River. Did the miracle landing
on the Hudson, yes.
Yeah.
So, Sully Sullivan.
Yeah, Sully Sullivan. Okay. I think now's a good time for some like rapid fire dumb questions just about what
Love it.
is up there on the airline.
There are no dumb questions.
Okay, there are. That's the whole premise of the show is that there are not, but there are kind of. Don't worry, I can get one. So who actually flies the planes? Is it the pilot, the co-pilot, an autopilot?
So I think in the case of a commercial airline, it's the pilot, and then they'll have a sort of small seat co-pilot in the right seat. They'll be the pilot's in the left, co-pilot would be in the right. And sometimes they're called the first officer. In this case, it was a first officer. And my understanding of this is the pilot is in charge, but obviously, he or she has the backup in the form of this other person if they need to go to the restroom, if they're impaired, if anything happens that they have to deal with. And there's a lot of tasks involved with flying an aircraft, so you might often have a pilot at the controls and the co-pilot is handling like the radio, the communications.
So there is no kind of Tesla self-driving aviation yet on these things.
I think there is experimentation with that. In fact, Duffy was talking at one of his air traffic modernization pressers. He was talking about having like the Uber of the air, like drone air flights that are there. I think they're sort of in beta mode. And I also think Uber sold that part of its company a few years ago, but you get the quick idea. So I think there's some innovation in that space, but I think at this moment, no.
But when a pilot is actually flying, what does the screen show? Like in the movies, there's this big circle and then the dots come and they show other airlines or other, things in the air that are near them. Is that what air traffic on a plane looks like?
I actually did recently look at a commercial flight cockpit and also went and sat in a simulator of a Black Hawk helicopter. They're obviously different, but I think the basic premise is there. You do have a radar screen. It's circular. You have dots for the aircraft that are in, within a certain vicinity. It's the same thing that the air traffic controller would be seeing on their quote unquote scope back at the air traffic control center. You obviously have the yoke, like the joystick that flies the plane. You have like hundreds of buttons and switches, like truly hundreds. You have your altimeters. You have several, at least two different kinds of altimeters. So
What's
lot
an
of different.
altimeter?
An altimeter measures your height, your altitude.
Okay.
And you can
An
do it in a couple
altimeter.
of different ways. You can do it via radar, or you can do it via air pressure, barometric pressure.
Got it. And then who is communicating with them on the ground? The air traffic controllers of the airspace in which they're above? Like, how does it work that you're flying through from, say, Los Angeles to New York? Who are they talking to throughout that 6-hour flight?
So you're definitely talking to air traffic controllers. When you take off, there's
Yes.
probably a tower at your airport that's on the runway somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And that tower is talking you through your takeoff and your like initial, moment or two of flight.
Uh-huh.
Then anywhere from about 5 miles to 50 miles out of your destination, you are talking to what's known as the TRACON, which is an acronym. It's Terminal Radar Approach Control something something.
Okay.
Those are the people that we're focused on with Newark.
Got it.
For example, they are not necessarily at the airport. They might be 40 miles away, or in this case, the Newark people are 80 miles away. They're looking at their radar scopes. They're in radio communication with the pilots. And they're telling them, who else is in the nearby airspace, what altitude they need to keep, what routes they can take to stay safe and separated. And then eventually, if they're doing sort of a long haul flight, as you mentioned, they're handed off to yet another group of controllers, which I believe is the center. So you'll hear about New York Center, Memphis Center, whatever. And they will keep up with you through even longer radii of flight.
Got it. And they could be anywhere at this point, right? Because like you're flying over, I don't know, Ohio or something.
Yeah, although I think it's geographically linked. I mean, I think at a certain point you're handed from, LA to, I'm just, maybe Vegas. I'm just trying to think like what are the close air centers along that route.
So you're kind of moving along. It's like a relay race.
Yeah, you're moving along. And then I think one thing that's notable with commercial pilots, as opposed to, say, military or law enforcement, is you have a radio where you can talk to other pilots if necessary. I think it's uncommon, but there was recently a situation with a near miss where one pilot told the other to like bear up to avoid a collision at the last minute.
That's like a what? Walkie-talkie?
No, they use their radar. I think there might be military jets that can talk to each other, but I'm just thinking of the helicopter I reported on that was in the crash. I know you don't want to be overly specific, but one issue there was they couldn't talk to the American Airlines flight, only to the controller. They were on different frequencies.
Got it. Okay. Okay. And it's all done through radio.
Yes.
And what would be the alternative?
There are a few things that are under testing and consideration. For one thing, the FAA a few years ago rolled out something called Datacom, which is a text messaging service. It's hard for me to picture a pilot in the air benefiting from text messaging, right?
But don't text while driving, especially a
pre-flight,
Yes.
you can send, flight plans and so on, which might, lighten the load a little bit. And there are other communications technologies that are, coming out and maybe adopted by the US. Duffy has talked about voice over internet protocol, for example, being a better alternative in his framework for modernizing air traffic control. So there are different things at play, but for now, radio is sort of the tried and true in the US system. Radar for visual, radio for communications.
And do you think, by the way, I know our former colleague at the New York Times, Nick Bilton, did some reporting on this, but nothing is interfered with when you turn on your phone on the flight or you are?
I've asked this I haven't done any reporting on this, but I've asked this as a civilian because frankly, half the time I just forget to put it in airplane mode. And I'm like, what's the real issue here? Why is it a problem? I've never gotten a clear answer. Have you?
It's kind of you shouldn't probably use it, but also I've seen people take Zoom calls on airlines before. So just have to
Usually
wonder
their
what's
Wi-Fi
happening.
doesn't support video streaming, is my
now
experience.
Now it does. Yeah,
I can barely even get an email going. Are you kidding? I could go on a tirade here.
Yeah, it's you can't get on when you want to stream, Emily in Paris, but you can definitely get on when you need to take a meeting you don't want to join anyways. Are the newer planes safer than older planes?
I can't generalize. I mean, the planes in and out of Newark are operated by United and other airlines, and they probably have a variety of new and old aircraft. I don't think that's germane to the airport location.
Got it. It's not the core of the issue. It wouldn't explain why there's more in one place.
Yeah, and I don't think it's the airplanes either. I think it's the government-owned equipment in the air traffic control centers, not so much what's present on the airplane. The airplanes actually have some great technology. I mean, for example, they have something called TCAS, TCAS, which is Traffic Collision Avoidance System, I think. And that'll warn them audibly and with a visual, like traffic, when somebody's nearby them. They'll sometimes get what's called an RA, which is a resolution advisory. You need to resolve this potential conflict, i.e. a potential collision in the air. The only problem with TCAS is when pilots are landing, or I assume taking off as well, they need to be hyper-focused on that landing process. It's it requires a ton of focus and, preparedness. So to be listening to the traffic as they get closer to many other airplanes as a matter of course is something they can't really do.
Is it more dangerous when planes take off or land? Is one of those more scary or dangerous or require more
Not that I know of. I mean, you do hear that the most dangerous parts of a flight are on takeoff and landing, and I assume that's simply because of congestion, but I don't know that one is more dangerous than the other.
Is there a fail-safe that happens if radio goes down or radar goes down? What is the fail-safe?
So great question. I could speak to what's happened at Newark. Even in the worst case, I don't think all the radar went down. I think several radars went down, but a couple of them were still working. Now, this is not a quick fix. It's not like I have a universal view if I'm a controller of your traffic and that guy's traffic as I'm watching my traffic. I usually have only my traffic. But I think there's an ability to go to another workstation and add other traffic. It's just not real time. It's not able to happen with the urgency that you need. Your workaround is you call on a landline, perhaps, your colleagues in another center and say, hey, we've had these outages, please watch these planes, or hold your planes because they might drift into my airspace or whatever. You rely on your colleagues in other places, I think is the short answer, while your system reboots. But you also hold planes in position, you have them circle, or you maybe have them, if they're a helicopter, you could have them hover. You can't really have a commercial airplane hover in the middle of the air, but you could take them in a loop, or you could tell them not to advance to the airport. You could prevent new traffic from taking off and further congesting the air at a time when you don't have great visibility or comms.
When we talk about airline close calls, what is a close call, distance-wise?
That's a good question. I am not sure. I mean, I could tell you that typically you want to have something like 500 feet of vertical distance between aircraft and a mile and a half to 3 miles between airplanes, like laterally speaking.
The air traffic controllers that you're talking about, these guys who are and gals who are calling each other maybe when there's issues, do they have the same shift schedules as pilots? Like we've all been delayed because the crew needed to get X
No,
number hours of rest.
I
No.
don't think so. I think air traffic control has kind of a set of shifts that they agree upon with their union and the government. And it's more or less, it's like 7 o'clock to 3 in the afternoon, and then 3 to 10. And then there's an overnight shift. I think pilots' shifts are whatever they need to do for their given trip. But I do think they can only work for a set number of hours before they're timed out. And I want to say that's 12 hours. But I think that may also depend on the distance they're flying and is it at night? Is there weather? I don't know all the ins and outs of that. But I do know that I recently got on a flight in New York for Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta. And the gate agent was like, everybody hurry up because the pilot's going to time out, but he's maybe willing to still take you.
It's like,
And we got
yeah.
on and the pilot was like, I'm sorry, y'all. I can't. I've been flying for 12 hours. We had bad weather coming up here. I don't think it's a good idea for me to take you back. And I literally thanked him as I was getting off
Yeah.
because, hey.
Yeah, you got to call it. Got to call it.
Yeah.
The reporting I'm reading right now is that these air traffic controllers, which I would have thought air traffic controllers like kind of a good job. You get paid for your training. You have a certain amount of protection from the union. You know, you have earlier retirement age at 56. Do they like their jobs right now?
A lot of the people I talk to love the work in general. I think my impression is there's a collegiality that develops that's almost like you hear about in the military or maybe in like an ER where you have just an intense level of teamwork and the stakes are incredibly high and your skills are very technical. And like in the best of times that has you bond with your colleagues in a very unusual way. And I'm generalizing. Obviously, there are probably some people that hate the job, um, but a lot of them feel let down by a variety of people: supervisors, the FAA, the union, the American public, wanting more than they can reasonably give. I mean, I think they're very sympathetic to passengers. They want passengers to feel safe. They want to keep them safe. But when you're operating and your scalpel is broken or the power goes out and you can't defibrillate a patient, like what are you supposed to do? So I think the sense of kind of betrayal is really profound with some people. And I think this also sadly takes a real toll on mental health. Like Sydney and Emily did a really affecting story about this in 23. Like people turn to drugs or they need therapy, but they can't go because if they go, they lose their medical clearance to be able to do the job.
Wait, what? Explain that.
I mean, you need to be declared physically and mentally fit to do this kind of work. And I don't know all the details, but I think the fear is if you are in, mental health care and you're diagnosed with anxiety or depression or something like this, you may not be regarded as mentally fit to do the work.
Okay. So, wow. So
So it's a
yeah.
chicken and an egg problem, really.
When you talk to these guys, is it very like hushed tones? Does it feel like Deep Throat and the X-Files? Like they want to tell you, but it's all off the record, it's all secret?
No. Yeah. I mean, some of them are nervous. I think right now you're seeing like a collective, like just exhaustion and frustration. And if they were ever going to speak out, it's going to be now.
And the burnout that we're seeing amongst air traffic controllers, are we seeing a similar kind of burnout amongst pilots?
Okay, so I haven't reported on this issue, but anecdotally, no, I'm not hearing that. And if anything, I'm hearing pilots rallying around controllers. I mean, during one of the this is sort of poignant, I thought. During one of the recent Newark outages a couple of weeks ago, I was listening to the air traffic control audio, which is available online, to see if I could isolate that moment where the equipment went out. And I didn't find it. Maybe I was listening to the wrong time segment, but I did hear at one point a controller talking with a pilot in the Newark airspace, and the pilot said, "Hey, we're rooting for you guys for better equipment and
Aw.
and no outages."
And Newark, just so you know, we're all rooting for you for better equipment and more staff. Hey, man, we appreciate it. Thanks.
That's
So
nice.
I think there's a real sense of camaraderie and a real sense of concern for the well-being of those workers.
So at Newark, we're seeing these outages, 30 seconds, 90 seconds we're hearing. Does that amount of time really matter? Like, Is anyone going to land when they aren't getting?
Yes. No, it
Okay.
matters. I mean, imagine if you are watching two aircraft fly through the sky at 500 knots. It's a nautical mile measurement for some reason per hour, and think how close two things could get to each other in a matter of seconds, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. I mean, absolutely, 30 seconds is an eternity.
But what's happening when those 30 seconds are going on is that no one is taking off or landing, right? They're just...
Well, no, because let's say we're talking about radar, because you often have like a 90-second radar outage. It might be 30 seconds of like a black screen, but then it reboots itself, and that takes the remainder of the time. So you're watching multiple flights in midair, like headed for the
they're
airport,
already at
and blink,
descent.
no visual. Kind of like what was happening to us when we were trying to record earlier. No visual at all. It's critical that you have that.
Got it. And this is not just happening at Newark Airport, right? We've seen outages happen elsewhere across the country.
We have. So one notable one was a 90-second outage that happened in the Denver area pretty recently. This was the Denver Center, which is the sort of longer haul flight oversight hub, and it's located outside of Denver in a city called Longmont. So that happened. And I've heard of sort of brief outages in other places, but those are probably the two major ones that I know of recently. And then that and the hotline that runs between the Pentagon and the Ronald Reagan Airport.
The 3-year outage?
Yeah.
That 3-year outage? Yeah, that sounds pretty terrible. Why don't they just shut down the airport? Like, why right now do they not just shut down Newark Airport and then get to what is at the bottom of it and fix it?
Well, I think that might be considered untenable by the airlines and even the flying public. To do that, you're talking about a fix that optimistically could be done by the end of the summer and, maybe by the end of the year or maybe even in a year. So you're going to shut down all the air traffic in and out of Newark for that period of time. I mean, people would lose their jobs. It would be like a serious revenue risk to the airlines. And potentially risk their viability. Passengers wouldn't be able to get places. Not only would passengers not be able to get places, they'd have to be refunded. I mean, there's an argument for doing that. But I will say the outages seem to be slowing in frequency and in length.
Got it. When all this is happening, are there like CEOs of airlines calling up heads of the FAA, talking
100%.
to the Newark Airport person and all of that, right? There's a huge negotiation of like, we can't afford to shut down. Because we've seen, FAA come out and say, oh, it needs to be X number of planes. And then they're like, oh, they're going to have X+2 number of planes landing at this time or whatever the case is.
I have wondered why we haven't had a ground stop, like no flights in or out of Newark on certain shifts where I happen to know they have like one certified controller and a couple of trainees. I mean, to my layman's eyes, like one controller doesn't seem like enough.
To handle the whole airport?
Yeah. I mean, they will have 1 to 2 trainees who can do like one position at the airport, but the controllers can do all the positions if they have to, the certified controllers. That to me seems low. But even controllers will tell me that's not totally unusual and it can be done. But bear in mind, like for these shifts, I know Newark better than other examples, but like for these shifts where they have 1 plus a trainee or 2, oftentimes the target is 10 people. The target is 14 people. And these are not like 1981 objectives. These are objectives that were set in accordance of the FAA and the Controllers Union in January for that airspace.
In January, they said there should be 14 people operating this, 14, combination of controllers
instead they have
and trainees.
Or 1.5, like,
okay.
Not half a person, obviously, but a person that can do a portion of the job.
All this sounds wild. Is it going to be safer when technology and AI are flying planes? Like, is the human layer the problem? The humans and the coordination?
I mean, I think the human layer is actually not the problem. I mean, I guess it's a problem if you consider that short staffing is part of our dilemma here.
Yeah.
But I think this requires perhaps a human eye to move across multiple spaces and multiple platforms to sort of consolidate a picture in their mind and make subjective decisions. What do I mean by that? I mean, a machine could look at the radar and the radio and maybe even have more seamless interactions. They could look at the other air traffic, gauge their speed and so on, but they couldn't then necessarily turn to a colleague and say, what are you seeing over there in LaGuardia? Or pick up a phone and say, what's happening up there? Or watch while a machine fritzes out on the other side and can't do its job. I mean, it's hard for me to see eliminating the humans from the picture because of all the unknowns. There is AI experimentation going on, though. The FAA has embraced that, and that seems like probably a good thing. I mean, we need to see how it works and work out the kinks, but absolutely, there needs to be more mechanization and more state-of-the-art technology brought in here. It's going to be expensive, and I think it's going to be a learning curve.
Are they finally ready in Washington? I mean, everything, obviously there's a lot of DOGE kind of, movement going on right now. There's a lot of issues in Congress. There's a new bill that's, Trump's bill that's being considered that I think you're reporting on.
Yeah.
Is airline travel a priority in Washington right now?
Yeah, the Republican budget bill included, I believe, $12.5 billion toward air traffic control modernization, which is a good start. I don't know if it's enough, but it's a good start.
Do you know what that compares to in previous years?
Well, like in the Biden administration, they made an $8 billion proposal in the final couple of years of the administration that did not pass. They also had some set aside in the infrastructure bill that I believe was $8 billion a year. But those amounts are not enough. And I'm not sure 12 and a half is enough, but it's definitely directionally encouraging. Now, we also don't know if this bill is going to pass the Senate. My sense is this is right. It may have been a historic bipartisan failure, but I do think now it's a bipartisan priority. Okay. So you would think that there will be, mutual interest in getting that piece done.
Yeah, it seems like bipartisan agreement on this is an issue, bipartisan agreement on it's the other guy's fault.
Yeah, and at the, there's a Senate Commerce Committee that oversees these issues. They've held a few hearings recently, and you can see pretty good mutual consolidation between the parties on, the need for improvement here.
With all of this happening, can we still say the U.S. is the safest country on earth to travel?
I mean, one of them, I actually researched that statistic recently, Nayeema, and it was hard to find good data to support that. I mean, I think it's widely regarded as one of them, but how are you measuring that? I mean, we have a huge airspace with a ton of users. And are we looking at fatalities? Are we looking at equipment outages? Is that stuff even universally tracked in venues around the world? I don't really know. I think it is one of the safest and most sophisticated, but I think clearly we're not in a good place right now.
This is really sad for me, by the way, because I know you don't fly out of Newark, but I fly out of Newark all the time. And I just flew back into Newark the other day from Park City. And I'm on the west side of New York, so it's just convenient.
And how was your experience?
It was fine. There was a delay, but I also had a backup flight to JFK, and that flight was also a little bit delayed by 15. It ended up being 45 minutes delay. In my mind, though, I was thinking it's going to be a delay issue, not a crash issue. I don't know why I had that sense. Is that why you're avoiding Newark? Because you think it's going to be delays, or because you're actually scared for your life?
I just don't feel comfortable knowing what I know about the staffing and the recent equipment outages. I mean, I kind of hate to say that because I don't want to alarm people, but that's just my opinion. But like I said, it wasn't an airport I tended to use. So it's not a huge change for me anyway.
Okay, but now you're making me think twice about this. This and the Swiss cheese, it's giving me all kinds of fears. We end every episode of Smart Girl Dumb Questions asking our guests what you, this eminently smart person, are dumb or curious about, what you haven't been able to solve, or a question that you've been afraid to ask out loud. Do you have one?
Yeah, I have one. Maybe it's germane to what we're talking about. So I really love mystery novels, true crime, horror movies. I like it all. Why is it fun to be scared?
Oh, that's a good question. Why is it fun to be scared? Okay, I like that.
Because sometimes it's just scary to be scared, right?
Yeah.
But other times, we love a great mystery. We love a great horror movie. It kind of takes us, I guess it takes us out of our headspace, but in a scary way.
Totally.
Maybe because we know it's fiction, it's like a safe space.
That is a really good question. I remember there's also this test, dating compatibility test, which is 3 questions you should ask to find out if you and your partner are compatible. And one's do you like traveling alone? And another one's I forget what the other one is, but the third one was, do you like horror movies? And if you both like horror movies, that's like a good indication. So why do an offshoot of your question to build on it would be like, why do some people love horror movies and other people don't?
That is definitely true. And I've wondered about that myself. Some people get nightmares. They get nightmares really easily and therefore they avoid it.
And I'm also like, does watching true crime make us commit more true crime as a society? Like, could you track it?
Gosh, I hope not.
I know, but these are good, dumb questions.
I do sort of like the fictional more than the real. But I will listen to true crime as well, for sure.
I know. I mean, Netflix has made us, and Serial have made us all true crime addicts, I feel like. There's another dumb question I have about airlines, which is like, does any of this have to do with climate change? Like, is the air less safe because of climate change? But what you're talking about is about technology on the ground.
I don't
and in the air.
see the connection right now, unless you factor in the idea that we're seeing more extreme weather.
Yeah.
And weather disruptions are going to be complexities all down the line, all throughout this world. They're going to add to delays. They're going to add to stress. I've learned a great term through this reporting, which is task saturation. Pilots that are in the cockpit and they have a million things to do just to get that plane where it needs to go and to land. It's task saturation. So terrible weather that affects your visibility, that affects your altitude, that adds turbulence, that could knock out power lines, those copper wires. It's a huge, to quote Jeff Bezos, complexifier.
Yes, that wouldn't explain why there's more of these in the United States, though, than elsewhere. So, like, we'd be seeing, the Dhaka airport in Bangladesh would be, like, really struggling if this were, all around climate change. So, okay. Anyway, speaking of task saturation, I know you have something to get to, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much, Kate, for spending time with me on this. This was great. Really helpful.
So fun.
Does anyone want to share a cab to JFK? Because after that episode, I will be rerouting all of my summer travel plans, I think. But I was so appreciative of how deep and thorough Kate Kelly's reporting was and how balanced it was. She didn't blame it all on Ronald Reagan or on Pete Buttigieg. She gave credit to Trump's transportation secretary, Sean Duffy, where credit was due. And she really painted this systemic problem, this, as she called it, multi-decade, multi-administration failure to plug the holes in the Swiss cheese system of airline safety in this country. And it really is systemic. It is partly about the politics and the bureaucracy. The fact that, there's this oversight-ish board that issues non-binding recommendations after 2 years. That seems too little, too late. And it's also the capitalism, the kind of profit incentive to keep these things going so that no one loses money. And it's the consumerism, the fact that I and maybe you want a good deal when we're up in the air. To quote Taylor Swift, I'm the problem, it's me. But a few things kept me optimistic throughout that conversation. The first is the kind of dedication and mission orientation of these air traffic controllers. I mean, they sound like they're putting up with a lot. I'm so glad the pilots have their back. And it is not an easy job. And you have to trust that they are trying their damnedest to keep us safe up there in the air. The second is the excellent reporting that's being done at the New York Times and elsewhere to really understand this issue and to kind of expose the cracks in the system so that we can plug them. And the third is this bipartisan energy and effort that has finally come to pass to fix this issue. It took tragedy to get here, but there's finally some movement. And I think that's a really good thing. I, for one, in the meantime, am happy to pay a little bit more to be a little bit safer in the air, but I intend to still complain about those weird Biscoff cookies and that melon that tastes like nothing. What is that weird melon? Anyways, in all seriousness, stay safe out there if you're traveling. And if you do like traveling, check out my episode with the Points Guy, or Points Guys, Brian Kelly and Nikki Calvin. You can find it wherever you're watching or listening to this podcast. That's it for today. This episode was produced with Dana Balut and Noah Friedman, with special thanks to Healy Cruz. If you like this episode, give us a 5-star review, like you'd give to your Uber of the air. And please send me all of your dumb questions, NayeemaRaza101@gmail.com. I'll see you next week for an all-new episode of Smart Girl, Dumb Questions.